Stranded in the desert, I became the target of armed strangers. But the real shock came when I realized my mom's mysterious past might have tied her to a dangerous world. What really happened during that phone call? The truth might be darker than I ever imagined. Hello, my YouTube family. I'm Naira Vox, a 23-year-old college girl with a curious heart and a love for the unknown. And tonight, I bring you my 9th horror story on this channel. So for the best experience, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let your imagination drift into the darkness. If you enjoy the chills and the thrill, show some love in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more haunted tales every day. This incident took place just a few weeks ago. I'm currently a senior in high school and have spent my entire life in Nevada, a place that's quiet, dry, and honestly, a little too still sometimes. My friends and I always found our escape in urban exploration, wandering through deserted buildings, forgotten tunnels, and crumbling malls, places that time seemed to abandon. We weren't in it for trouble, no vandalism, no law-breaking. It was more about the eerie stillness, the adrenaline, the stories hiding in silence. There was always one person who led us into the strangest, most untraceable locations, Charles. Quiet, distant, and always carrying secrets. Somehow, he always had a new spot, a strange place none of us had ever heard of. I stopped questioning where he got his info a long time ago. One afternoon, he sent us a screenshot from this really unsettling Instagram profile. Barely any followers, grainy, dark photos, and comments that made your skin crawl. The caption said something like, "Dozens of forgotten mine shafts scattered across the Mojave, if you know where to look." Charles, of course, had already messaged the account. Whoever was behind it sent him a rough idea of where to search. That was all it took. He became obsessed overnight. By Saturday, we had a plan. It was just the three of us. Charles, James, and me. I had a Wrangler that handled desert trails like a beast, so naturally, we took that for the trip. We didn't have any proper directions, just a vague area marked by a pin somewhere deep in the Mojave wasteland. The spot Charles picked was ridiculously remote. We'd already left the highway behind nearly 30 minutes ago, and whatever dirt path we were on now barely even qualified as a road. The landscape was a blur of rocks, sand, and emptiness. It felt endless. I kept glancing at my phone, even though I knew we were completely off-grid. In the back seat, James was getting restless. He started complaining that this whole thing was a joke, that Charles had been duped by some random weirdo online. But Charles? He wasn't backing down. He told us to keep driving, like he was following something we couldn't see. That's just how he is. Once he's focused on something, there's no reasoning with him. So, I kept going, even though I was starting to think we were chasing shadows. Just when we were about to give up and turn around, James leaned forward and pointed to something off in the distance. At first, it just blended in with the surroundings, more rocks, more dirt. But as we got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a partially buried, old wooden structure built into the slope of a hill. The entrance was damaged, maybe even caved in, but behind the broken support beams, there was a dark, narrow opening. It wasn't large, but it was definitely carved by human hands. A mine shaft. Charles didn't say a word. He just opened up the offline map he had downloaded earlier, marked the location, and saved it. Then he turned to James with this look in his eyes and said, "Told you." James rolled his eyes and said it was just dumb luck. But I'll admit, even I was a little shaken. That place didn't feel like something we were meant to find. After circling aimlessly through the middle of nowhere, the fact that we actually stumbled upon a mineshaft felt unreal. I pulled over a short distance from the entrance, parking on a flat patch of dirt just off the trail. We got out, grabbed our gear, and Charles even handed us masks, like he'd expected the air inside to be less than friendly. As we approached the entrance, it looked even more unstable up close. The wooden frame creaked ever so slightly, worn down by time and weather. Charles bent down, picked up a rock, and casually tossed it into the darkness. We waited.
Clang.
Clang, clang, then silence. The drop was deep, too deep. Charles glanced at us and said, with an unsettling calm, "If anyone slips, that's it." Despite that, we moved forward. Thankfully, it wasn't a vertical shaft. It sloped downward, sharply but walkable. No ropes needed, though every step felt like it could slide out from under you. The walls were reinforced in some places with aged wooden beams, surprisingly still holding strong. But the deeper we went, the more the silence wrapped around us. It got colder, too, like the darkness itself carried a chill. After a while, the light from the surface completely disappeared behind us. We finally reached a flat stretch. The tunnel leveled out and opened into a wider corridor. It split into multiple paths, like branches of some ancient maze. It was exactly what you'd picture. Cracked wooden supports spaced out every few steps, rusted rail tracks buried under layers of dust, forgotten fragments of what might have once been tools or cart pieces scattered on the ground. The air had that heavy, stale smell, old, untouched, and oddly suffocating. That's when I realized how smart Charles was to bring those masks. We picked a tunnel at random and started moving, our footsteps soft on the dirt floor. Nobody really spoke. We weren't treasure hunting or searching for anything, just exploring. But there wasn't much left to discover. Most of it seemed stripped clean long ago. And then, we heard it.
Something. Faint.
From deeper within the darkness. It started off faint, a low, dragging noise echoing down the tunnel. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw Charles freeze. He heard it too. James silently gestured for us to shut off our flashlights.
We did.
Darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't even see my own hands, just the sound. That slow, unsettling scrape, like metal, or maybe old wood, being pulled across stone and dirt. The echo made it hard to tell where it was coming from, but whatever it was getting closer. Time warped. We stood in that pitch-black silence for what felt like forever. The dragging continued, inching toward us, slow, steady, deliberate. And then a click. James's flashlight flicked on for half a second, then off again. My heart stopped. The sound immediately cut out. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then, out of the depths of the tunnel,
Clang.
a deafening metallic crash rang out, like something heavy had been dropped. And right after it, that scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was like something torn straight from a nightmare, twisted, guttural, evil. We didn't wait.
We didn't speak.
We just ran. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. Our footsteps thundered through the tunnel, the only thing louder than the blood pounding in my ears. Behind us, I heard movement. Something running, chasing. Panic squeezed my chest like a vice. I was at the back, struggling to keep pace, and then I stumbled. My foot hit something. I went down hard, one of my shoes flying off. My ankle screamed in pain, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I left the shoe behind, because whatever was back there, I wasn't going to wait and find out. Ahead of me, Charles and James were already scrambling up the slope toward the surface. I didn't climb. I launched myself after them. Each step on that jagged would send shocks of pain shooting up my leg. Running half barefoot felt like torture. I could feel fresh splinters embedding into my foot with every desperate push forward. If not for the pure adrenaline flooding my system, I honestly don't know how I would have made it out. The second I stumbled into the sunlight, I collapsed onto the dirt. My foot was wrecked, completely useless. Charles and James practically had to drag me back to the Wrangler. I could barely stand, let alone drive. James jumped into the driver's seat, threw it into gear, and hit the gas like his life depended on it. None of us said a word. We just drove, dust trailing behind us. No one looked back. We didn't know if that thing had chased us up the shaft, and frankly, we didn't care. We weren't about to hang around and find out. By the time we reached the hospital, I was shaking. The pain was unbearable. I nearly blacked out in the waiting room. Tetanus shot, splinter removals, bandages. I couldn't walk right for days. When I was finally hobbling around again, James told us something. Something he hadn't mentioned before. He lost his wallet. Somewhere near the entrance, maybe when he helped me into the car. We were hesitant, but eventually agreed. We'd just go to the entrance. No going inside. Ever again. Using the pin Charles had saved, we made our way back. The desert felt even more lifeless this time. The mine just sat there like a wound in the earth. No sign of the wallet. No sign of anything. Until we saw it. My shoe. It was placed carefully a few feet from the mouth of the shaft.
Not tossed.
Not trampled.
Just sitting there.
I limped over. The air felt heavy. And when I picked it up, it was clean. But the shoe wasn't just sitting there. It was mangled, torn in places like something had chewed through it. There were actual bite marks in the rubber. Entire portions had been ripped away. We didn't stick around to inspect it any further. Nobody said a word. We just turned back to the car and left. To this day, none of us have been able to explain what happened down there. Sure, you could say it was a person, maybe someone hiding out, maybe just a lunatic. But even that doesn't make sense. There was nothing down in that shaft. No food, no water, no signs of life. What could they possibly survive on? Charles had messaged the guy who originally posted the mine location on Instagram. He never got a reply. That was enough for us. I haven't stepped foot near the desert since. And I won't. Not for a very, very long time. I've always been more of a rugged, back-to-nature kind of guy. Give me a tent, a campfire, and a fishing pole. I'll take that over some overpriced resort any day of the week. Turns out, my girlfriend of 6 months is wired the same way. That's probably one of the reasons we clicked so quickly. A couple weeks ago, Tiki and I decided to try something new. We packed up and headed out into the desert for a few days of off-grid camping. We'd done forests, lakesides, even the mountains once, but this was different. There's something surreal about that endless, sunburnt silence the desert offers. It's like stepping into another planet. And if we're being real, the biggest draw for both of us was the sky. The stars. Even back when we were first dating, we'd drive beyond the city limits just to lie across the hood of my truck and watch the constellations crawl across the night. So when I read about a patch of land far removed from any towns or roads, untouched by light pollution, I was sold. It was legal to camp on but had zero amenities. Just dry earth, a few fire rings, and the clearest night sky you could imagine. Exactly what we were looking for. We loaded up the truck with all our camping gear and started the long drive on that Friday morning. It was a solid 3-hour trek, but that last hour was on a dirt road that seemed to stretch on forever. There was no sign of civilization in sight, no houses, no traffic, just endless sand and rock. And honestly, that was exactly the vibe we were looking for. By the time we arrived at the campsite, it was already late afternoon. The place was deserted, just like I had hoped. The first 2 nights were perfect, just what we needed. Warm days that bled into cool desert nights, and skies so clear it felt like you could touch the stars. We'd sit by the fire, sipping on a couple drinks, passing a joint back and forth, chatting about random nonsense. Or we'd just lie back, gazing at the stars in silence. No distractions, no obligations, just us and the vastness of the desert. And yeah, the tent was put to good use, too. But something was off. 2 nights in a row, we heard this strange sound. It was distant, barely audible, but there. A low, drawn-out noise. Almost like a howl or a moan. It didn't quite sound like anything human. More animalistic, like something from deep in the wild. The first night, we both paused when we heard it. Tiki gave me that look, the one where she's silently asking if I heard it too. And I nodded, but we both just laughed it off. I chalked it up to coyotes, maybe a mountain lion, things we weren't used to, but weren't out of place in the desert. The second night was the same, right at the same time. We didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just more desert wildlife. Sure, it was unsettling, but we were determined not to let it ruin the vibe. But the third night, that's when things changed. I woke up to soft footsteps outside the tent. At first, it was barely audible, just a few faint crunches of dry dirt. I held my breath, trying to place it. It wasn't an animal. The steps were too slow, too steady. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to grab the flashlight, shake Tiki awake, say something, but no words came. The steps didn't circle the tent. They stopped just a few feet away from it. And for what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Absolute silence. I kept scanning the dark desert around us, every shadow feeling like it might be hiding something. We walked fast, my heart pounding in my chest as the adrenaline from the fire still buzzed in my veins. The air smelled faintly of smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I heard Tiki muttering to herself, probably trying to keep herself calm, and I did the same. Just focus on getting to the truck. That's all that mattered. But then something felt off. We hadn't been walking long, but the desert was unnervingly silent. No wind, no animals. Just the crunch of our footsteps on the dry dirt. Every few seconds, I felt that gnawing sensation that we weren't alone. But I kept moving, ignoring the nagging voice in my head that told me to turn around. And then it hit me. We should have reached the truck by now. The truck wasn't far from the campsite, and we should have seen it, heard it, something. But there was nothing. We'd been walking in what felt like the wrong direction. The desert, in its cold vastness, was playing tricks on us. I stopped and turned to Tiki, who was a few steps behind. She looked just as confused as I felt. "Do you know which way we're going?" I asked her, though I wasn't sure if I was asking her or trying to convince myself. She shook her head, her eyes wide with unease. "Something's wrong," she whispered. I didn't respond.
I didn't know what to say.
The whole situation felt wrong, like we were being pulled into something deeper, into a place we didn't belong. I tried to push the thought away, focusing on the truck, on getting out of here. But that's when I heard it. A soft, low rustling behind us, like someone moving through the dirt. I froze, every muscle in my body stiffening. It was too quiet to be just the wind. This sound was deliberate. Tiki grabbed my arm, and I could feel her trembling. Then, through the darkness, a figure appeared. It wasn't someone we knew. It wasn't even someone who looked human. The silhouette was too tall, too broad, and the way it moved was jerky and unnatural. I didn't think. I just grabbed Tiki's hand and started running. We didn't look back. As I grew older, I started to notice things that didn't quite add up. Little inconsistencies in the stories she told, or things she'd say in passing that didn't quite fit with what I knew. It was as if she was hiding pieces of her past, as though there was something she wasn't telling me, or anyone for that matter. For years, I never pushed her on it. After all, who would want to bring up painful memories, especially when they weren't ready to talk about them? But lately, I've been feeling like there's something more to it, something bigger that she's not willing to let anyone in on. I started paying closer attention to her mannerisms when she did talk about her past. The way her eyes would flicker nervously when certain topics came up, how her hands would twitch as if she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to do it. There was a weight to her silences, a kind of heaviness that made me wonder if she was hiding something far darker than just childhood trauma. A few weeks ago, I found a box in the attic, tucked away behind old family albums and dusty keepsakes. The box was unmarked, but it felt strange, like it didn't belong with the rest of the things. Inside, I found a collection of old letters in Spanish, written in a tight, elegant hand. There was a stack of photographs, too, all of people I didn't recognize. Some looked like they were from another time, a different era entirely. The photos were faded, worn around the edges, but there was one that stuck out to me. It was a picture of my mom, much younger, standing next to a man I didn't know, with a dark, brooding expression on his face. They were standing in front of what looked like an old, crumbling building in the middle of nowhere, with a backdrop of harsh, dry land. The caption written in faded ink on the back of the photo read, "La Tierra no olvida." I didn't know what it meant, but it felt ominous. "The land doesn't forget," I translated softly to myself. The discovery unsettled me. It raised more questions than answers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my mom was somehow connected to all of this, to whatever history those photographs held. And yet, when I confronted her about it, she acted like it was nothing, like it was just some old memory, better left forgotten. But I couldn't let it go. Not after everything that happened in the desert, not after hearing those screams, knowing that something or someone was lurking out there in the dark, possibly connected to whatever my mom had been running from all these years. The closer I looked, the more the pieces seemed to fit together. My mom's past, that man in the photo, the screams in the desert. It was all connected somehow, and I had to know the truth. I couldn't shake my curiosity about my mom's past. Over the years, I became increasingly intrigued by how expertly she avoided questions about it, especially during family gatherings. It almost felt like she had perfected the art of sidestepping anything personal about her life before America. What I do know, though, is that she grew up in a border town in northern Mexico, right along the Texas border. Not the most glamorous place, especially considering its reputation. Over time, I realized that the only thing I knew for certain about her family came from a joke she used to tell. She would laugh and say her dad's side of the family were the politicians, while her mom's side were the criminals, but she'd never quite figured out which was which. Back then, I brushed it off as a cynical joke about politics, but as I got older, I started to wonder if there was more truth in that than I first thought. Ever been in a situation where language or lack of understanding put you at a disadvantage? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about the challenges we face when communication breaks down. It didn't take much to figure out what they wanted from me. Within moments, they had my phone, keys, wallet, and all my personal items. It felt like I was about to be left behind in the middle of the desert, completely stranded. Then, one of the men climbed into my truck, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. I suddenly realized that I hadn't hung up the phone with my mom, and since the truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through the window as the man reached toward my phone to hang it up, but then pulled his hand back, as if he had second thoughts. Instead, he seemed to listen closely. That's when it hit me. My mom must have been talking to him. Soon, I saw his lips move, and I could tell they were having a conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew it was in Spanish. I swear, I'm 90% sure he repeated ours name a few times, almost like he was making sure he heard it right, just like my mom had mentioned. Eventually, the other two guys must have figured out what was happening because they stopped watching me and walked over to the truck. The man inside rolled the window down and stared at me, speaking to the others. After a brief exchange, all three men turned to me, sizing me up. The conversation didn't go on for long after that. Then they hung up the phone, came over, and handed me everything back, my phone, my keys, and all my belongings. The only thing missing was the cash in my wallet. One of the men looked me in the eye, smiled, and in a thick accent said, "Tax," as he did it. Ever been in a situation where you felt like you were in the middle of something bigger than you? Share your story in the comments. Let's discuss what goes through your mind when you realize you're caught in a strange situation. I've never been more relieved to lose all my cash in my life. As I drove off, I noticed all three vehicles, including the one that had been trailing me, speeding off into the desert, leaving the road behind. I tried to memorize their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in a state of shock. A few minutes later, I called my mom and demanded an explanation. She claimed that she had simply threatened to call the police on them as she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I didn't buy that for a second and insisted she tell me the real conversation. She stuck to her story, saying most of the Spanish was just her trying to plead with them. Even though I didn't believe her, I had no choice but to accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. After that, we ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in complete silence. To be honest, I did my best to forget that experience. But as time went on, the nagging thoughts just wouldn't go away. I'm starting to believe that my mom had some kind of connection to a Mexican gang or cartel back in the day. Even more chilling is the possibility that her ties didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not naive, so I can't help but wonder how much longer she expects to keep this up. I feel like I should just confront her directly, but I'm terrified of the tension it might cause. Or worse, what kind of world I might be stepping into if she tells me the truth. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something that your loved ones are hiding? How did you approach the situation? Share your thoughts below. Let's talk about handling tough family secrets.